Hey guys, TR Willie here, and today I've got my second installment of my TR's Mod Shop collection series. Today I'm going to be looking at the second Stratocaster that I ever purchased and owned and modded, and this is one I like to call Bertha. It's a 1993 Strat Plus Deluxe that I bought in the spring of '94. It looked very different when I bought it. It originally was a three-tone sunburst body, and it came with Fender lace sensors. It came with the red, silver, and blue lace sensor pickups. But as you can see, those pickups are no longer in this guitar. Set that's in here now is the Andy Timmons set. It's a pair of DiMarzio cruisers in the neck and middle position. They're actually the bridge version of the cruiser. And then in the bridge is the actual Andy Timmons AT1 DiMarzio pickup. And it's a very, very warm, it's just a great sounding pickup. Interestingly enough, I read in an article recently that it is probably one of the closest pickup to what was in the original Ernie Ball Music Man, Eddie Van Halen signature guitars from the early 90s, in terms of its specs, in terms of it's very, very close to the bridge pickup that he had in those guitars. But again, it's the Andy Timmons set. I'm a big fan of Andy's. He's sort of, I kind of hear him as a cross between, it's almost if Joe Satriani had been from Texas. He's very influenced by Eric Johnson, but he's still got his technique is just ferocious, but he has this great tone you can tell it's influenced by Eric, but it's his own thing as well. But yeah, again, that's his pickup set, and as I demo it, you'll be able to hear the different sounds that I can get out of that. One of the also features that's great about it is there's a treble bleed on the volume knob, so if you turn down, you do not lose the clarity. So that's a really, really useful feature. The neck of this guitar, it still has the original Wilkinson nut, and I believe '93 may have been the last year that they used the Wilkinson nut. The Wilkinson is what Jeff Beck still uses in his Stratocasters. He has a box of old Wilkinson nuts. His actually are a little different on the bass end, where this is square all the way across. His have like an angle to them on the last three strings, which was an earlier version of the Wilkinson. This guitar also has the original locking tuners that came with the guitar. The neck has been refinished. Interesting thing about the neck, when I always preferred the look of a vintage, sort of what they call a vintage orange neck. And when I first bought this guitar, it was very pale, very pale white, almost maple. And I always kind of would look at pictures of vintage Strats and kind of envy that kind of yellowish orange tint. And, back in the early 90s, didn't have the internet. And so I tried all these different, ways of trying to stain the neck. That's just stuff from the hardware store. None of them turned out right. And the neck ended up being really kind of ugly. There was stain, built up around the frets, and then I would try to take it off, and it was a very long and ugly process over the years of trying to finish it and unfinish it and removing. What ended up happening was when I would have to sand off the stain, I ended up with a very, very light scalloping to the fretboard. It may even be imperceptible from there, but just that constant sanding and so forth created a very, very shallow scallop on a lot of the frets. And so it does, in a sense, play like a scalloped fretboard. There's a lot more room for vibrato and bends on this guitar. And finally, once the advent of the internet and I could learn what I was doing, I ended up getting an actual professional grade paint, and was able to spray it down and get that kind of vintage orange look that I'd always liked One other point about the paint job on this. This was actually a custom paint job done by Royco Custom Finishes. It is based on a Mariner turquoise, I believe it's a Pontiac GTO color from the 60s, possibly 70s. But the original three-tone Sunburst was really damaged, and I was actually looking for something that looked kind of like an aged Lake Placid blue, and I ended up with this color. Color turned out a little more green than I had originally hoped, but still it's a very cool color. It's almost a trick paint in a way, depending on the light. Some lights it looks more blue, some lights it looks more green. This guitar is very heavy. Most Strats, run around 7 to 8.5 pounds. This is a solid 10 pounds. It's made out of northern ash, very, very heavy body wood. Northern ash is what they make baseball bats out of. But what's interesting, it actually gives this guitar it has a very bright cutting tone. It's also interesting to note that apparently Eddie Van Halen's early Frankenstein was also made of northern ash. And this guitar just has a very different tone. It's not as warm of a tone as some of my other guitars. Again, it's very kind of bright and cutting. So it helps having the warm pickups inside, and that kind of offsets the sort of the brightness that this guitar has. If you're familiar with some of my other videos, you've probably seen the guitar in different alterations. It used to have a 1960s style rosewood neck on it. I had that on there for many years. Kind of like my first guitar, Sybil, this has a very thin neck. And then especially after, sanding several times on the fretboard, this is actually probably the thinnest neck that I have. And again, with my very long fingers, it really would give me hand cramps after playing it for too long. So most of my other guitars since then have much fatter necks, but this is another one of those thin ones from the late 80s, early 90s. It still plays very, very nice though. You can see there's a lot of wear on the back of the neck from kind of years of playing it. You can see especially up around the cowboy chords where it's worn out. Also, the tremolo on this guitar I have set up with quite a bit of float on it. I don't know if that's visible. One thing I found recently, I've always struggled with the tuning on Stratocasters, as most people have, and I do still have some guitars that either have a blocked tremolo or a decked tremolo. But one thing interesting that I've found is that the more balanced of a floating tremolo you have, it's actually easier to keep the guitar in tune. I find if you have either a decked or where the tremolo is closer to the body, it seems like there's not enough up-pull to pull the strings back in tune. Whenever you drop the bar on a Stratocaster, the strings will loosen towards the tuners, and then when the bar comes back up, they don't pull all the way back. And some of that has to do with you needing to keep the nut slots lubricated. I found that many times I struggled more when I had either a decked tremolo or with some with it just had a minor float. A larger float, it seems like there's more room to pull backwards and pull up and actually pull those strings back. And I've noticed this originally from a video with Carl Verheyen, where he talked about how he sets his tremolo up. He actually sets his at a float and sets intervals so that the G at the 12th fret can pull up a step and a half. Then the B string will pull up a whole step, and then the E string could pull up a half step. And so you end up with about plus or minus an eighth of an inch off the back of the guitar that it floats, but I found that it does seem to stay in tune much, much better. I mean, it is a great guitar. I call it Bertha because she is so heavy. just kind of a funny name I decided to use for her. I'll go ahead and demo it now so you can hear what it sounds like. And again, 93 plus Deluxe, heavily modified, known as Bertha. And here's how she sounds.
you.